Author's Press.
Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. And on the line with us today, we have Rajesh Pandey. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Howl of the Gods. If you guys want to get everything that Raj has to offer, do yourself a favor and head directly to his personal site, howlofgods.com. There, not only will you find more information on Raj himself, you'll find more information on this book as well as find hyperlinks set up to take you to the purchasing page. So one more time, that's howlofgods.com. And I will say, Raj was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business, Authors Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and contact Authors Press. You can find out more information on them at authorspress.com. Sit back, strap in, let's get ready for a fantastic ride. Because listen, Raj is the expert, okay? I'm not going to steal his thunder. He's going to be able to articulate everything much better than I ever could anyway. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Raj, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you?
Hello, Mr. Cole. Thank you very much for having me. It is truly a great pleasure to be on your show.
Absolutely. Well, listen, the pleasure is all ours, Raj. We're very much looking forward to this and really embarking upon the journey that you've laid out for us. Now, I know we have so much information to cover, but before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Start by articulating to our listening audience a little bit more about yourself, please.
I actually grew up in Georgia, in South Georgia, and went to college at Mercer University in Georgia, studied engineering, and then went to graduate school in Alabama, where I got a master's in engineering, and I started working in industry, the medical device industry, up in Michigan. Winters got way too cold for me. I was there 4 years, but decided to head down to Florida, continue in medical devices, and I've been doing helping build small medical device companies into, successful ones, over the last about 20 years. So the book I wrote, Howl of the Gods, actually is something that I started when I was in college. And I think it was the last day of summer break before I started classes in my senior year that I typed kind of the last word of the first draft.
Fantastic. I am so curious. You're the VP of R&D for a medical device company. As you stated, you have been an engineer for 25 years with 15 patents and many commercialized devices. I am at a loss for words. How did you come to write a horror story about werewolves?
Yeah, I wonder that myself. It's a great question. It's not an obvious path, is it? But like I had mentioned, Mr. Cole, I actually wrote the draft of the story when I was in college. So in other words, when I was young. But during that time, growing up, my favorite author of fiction was Stephen King, and in many ways he still is. He's still producing great work. And along with that, I've always loved mythology of all kinds, Norse, Greek, Hindu, Christian, almost you name it. So they were influencing what I was thinking about when I wasn't thinking about stress tensors or solving differential equations, which we did in engineering all the time. So, even though engineering is a very creative field, no doubt about that, but you're always working within rules and using the rules creatively. And your main concern about myths is busting them, so to say, not utilizing them. So this type of story, Howl of the Gods, which is pretty much pure escapism, as you very well put it in your very generous intro. In pure escapism, internal consistency is important, but I created the rules to work with as an author, and that was a different type of creative outlet that was very attractive, especially given my enjoyment of character-driven horror. And I just love the werewolf mythology. It's a very powerful kind of subgenre. really exploring ourselves, because I think in many ways it's highly relatable. We can transform from being calm and pleasant to being angry, maybe even chaotically so. Imaginatively, the projection of ourselves as another animal, especially one as woven into our cultures and our myths as the wolf, is just very alluring. So I think it's really the perfect kind of escapist vehicle to contemplate, those kinds of main themes.
Absolutely. Listen, without further ado, Raj, Howl of the Gods. Tell us a little bit more about your book.
Oh, sure, thanks. Well, the story is kind of set in a fictional city in Moon Valley, aptly named. But the city of Moon Valley is being stalked by a killer that can be, rightly described as striking without warning or sound, and whose howl contains a power granted by the gods themselves. And there's a police lieutenant, Hal Dillon, who is drawn into this kind of grisly web. And as he uncovers the mystery of what the killer actually is, he discovers something even more harrowing, that he and this killer, the werewolf, are united actually in a struggle against a common enemy that they've both had for years. And so this leads Hal and his girlfriend, Sylvia, as well as a couple of reporters that happen to latch on to the story. He finds, they all find themselves engaged in this battle, which turns out not only to be a battle to solve the mystery and stop the killer, but actually a battle between forces of chaos and order and forces of course, life and death. And they all have to face very strong fears that have come upon them through their years. And they have to decide how they're going to overcome those fears, or maybe even succumb to them, all in the midst of encountering these great powers that are kind of attacking and aligning against them.
Again, here on the line with Rajesh Pandey. We're discussing his fantastic book, Howl of the Gods, available for purchase directly through his personal site, howlofgods.com. Raj, next question that I'd love to go into. Now, I think it's pretty fair to say the horror genre is massive, okay? And especially when it comes to books about werewolves, right? I mean, this is something that's very common, and a lot of other authors have embarked upon that path. I'm curious,
right,
what do you think makes this book unique?
Well, another great question. Maybe a couple of things come to mind for me. I think first, this is a story that mixes in kind of traditional mythology, especially from the Greek and Native American pantheons. And I think that weaving in of grander mythology adds some interesting twists that I think will keep readers guessing. And the other advantage of that is it has the allure of kind of moving the story in and out of being extremely personal to being a little more grand. So readers can kind of travel into a narrower focus, and then they get taken, kind of on a little broader path with that incorporation of mythology. Wolves play prominent roles in many of these mythologies, especially the two I mentioned, Greek and Native American. So it was really enjoyable weaving that into the story, and I think readers will find that aspect of it fascinating, especially readers who enjoy, hearing and learning about mythological stories. And it may even spark some readers who aren't as familiar with some of the reference mythology to read more about it. And if that were the case, I'd be over the moon. No pun intended there. But I think the first thing is that incorporation of mythology, and the second, I think, is that many of the popular stories and movies about where werewolves are involved have the central characters as victims of a bite, or being part of a clan or group of werewolves, and then they become werewolves themselves and struggle with the havoc they wreak in the process, or they embrace it as part of their clan in a battle against an outside enemy. All those stories are great and certainly provided some information, some inspiration for me. But my story isn't so clear-cut. You know, the central characters have choices, I think is the best word, around this power of lycanthropy, this struggle of, you know, human dualism. And, you know, I think, I don't want to give too much away, but the main conflicts they face, both internal and external, aren't necessarily about being a werewolf. Their conflicts are, I think, a little more relatable. And it could even be that holding such a power, such as, you know, lycanthropy, is a salvation to their actual conflicts, which are common. And, you know, I just have to say the two stories that I thought were amazing for being new perspectives on that genre were Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf and Robert McCammon's The Wolf Hour. I know I'm supposed to be plugging my own book, which is, I think, is a great read. But you know, I think those just serve as, the reason I bring them up is those just serve as good examples of stories that took you know, in my opinion, a very interesting perspective on the werewolf genre, which is what I tried to do also.
Now, Raj, your book is clearly a fiction, right? It's clearly a fictional narrative that you created in large part in your imagination. But you've mentioned on a number of occasions in this interview that you're pulling from different cultures and different backgrounds. I'm curious, what type of research did you do in preparation for this book?
Oh yeah, thanks for that question. So, you know, growing up, again, I would read a lot of stories about mythological characters, just ones that I happened to find interesting as a kid, with, you know, most of the time because they had cool pictures, right? but reading more about the actual narratives was great. And so much of our current culture is either references or is based on, for example, Greek mythology. So just, you know, doing a lot of reading on that subject. I mean, I think I started writing this back in, you know, 1991, or at least the current embodiment of it in 1991 or 92. So I was reading encyclopedias. You know, there wasn't Wikipedia or anything at that time, but I was reading encyclopedias. I was checking out books in the library about mythology. Joseph Campbell wrote a generally, you know, descriptive book about how different mythologies are incorporated into our current stories, heroes' journeys. So I pulled from all of that. I also was an avid Dungeons and Dragons player, so role-playing. So, you know, we dealt with all kind of mythology, and that really sparked my interest to do further reading. Absolutely. I think most readers, listeners and readers are familiar with Thor, you know, especially thanks to Marvel. But, you know, that is part of the Norse mythology, which also has a, you know, gigantic wolf in it. So all of those things just really, I pulled from all of those sources, you know, books about mythology, encyclopedias about them, other fictional books that incorporated mythology in them. Again, some Stephen King and a Robert McCammon book. All those sources were kind of points of my research for this particular book.
You know, and as we start to wind down and tie up this fantastic interview, Raj, what are you hoping to see your readers take away most from reading Howl of the Gods?
Well, I think primarily I hope they'll enjoy it and have fun reading it. And if that's all that comes out of it, that will be absolutely great. But, you know, after that, I really just hope most of it sticks with them, especially maybe thinking about how we internally process death and finality, and how we deal with the chaos that can either creep or gush in some cases, like, you know, it has the last year and a half into our lives. I think, you know, a lot of times we kind of feel like we're in a great hunt. We're pursuing things constantly, and that's good. It provides exhilaration, enjoyment, goals to pursue. But we can also feel like we're being hunted, certainly by death, which eventually always gets its prize, but also by agents of chaos and havoc, and by internal guilt and our own, you know, guilt about the different natures that we can display, calmness versus savagery, so to say. So I hope the book kind of provides an exciting avenue for readers to think about this. And as I mentioned before, I hope people really find mythology interesting. Myths, in my opinion, are avenues in and of themselves of exploring our relationship to others and to nature and to the different facets of ourselves that are both noble and savage. So anything that readers get beyond just enjoyment along those lines would be fantastic.
There you have it. Raj, being an artist myself, and I'm in a different medium. I'm an actor and a filmmaker based here in Los Angeles, but, having this platform, I always love to try to pay it forward, in a sense, to other artists out there listening in. Now, specifically with regards to writing, I'd love to take this opportunity, pick your brain, and really be able to learn any words of wisdom that you may be able to relay. For any new writers out there listening in right now, what words of wisdom would you be able to relay to them?
Oh, thanks. I think, I guess a couple of things is, get your ideas down. Don't be hesitant about starting the process of, forming a story and filling it out and fleshing it out. And, don't worry about changing it. Don't worry about, writing 10 pages and then coming back the next day and reading them and scrapping it all because, something new or better came along. I think the key point here is just don't be afraid of putting your ideas down and fleshing them out. And I think the other thing is, all of us can always get better at what we do. And I think, honing your craft, attending a seminar or two on writing, or if you have a friend who's in the business, who is an author, pick their brains about things and, get outside opinion and understand that criticism isn't personal. And, when people have read my book and provided comments and criticism on it in its earlier stages, I thought initially that I would be, I would get all upset and take it personally. But what I found was their insights were really good. And I incorporated, many of those comments into what ended up being the final product. So I think those are the things I would probably, the best gems I could offer. Other than that, talk to someone a lot more accomplished than I am in terms of writing and see what they think.
So many valuable gems that you put out there. I want to go back to the very first thing that you said in terms of just putting your ideas out on the page. Guys, it's interesting. A lot of things, regardless of whether it's writing, exercising, whatever the case may be, starting is always the hardest part, isn't it? Just embarking upon that journey, because there's so much of the unknown that is still waiting for you. And a lot of times with that unknown comes a lot of fear. And through that, it leads to hesitation. It leads to reservations. But just getting started, putting the words on the page, putting the ideas out there. You don't have to be committed to them just because they're on the page, but get the ball moving. Get it going. I absolutely love that. Guys, listen, there's so much still yet to be discovered. Howl of the Gods is the book you have to pick up. And Rajesh Pandey is the author you have to thank for bringing it to your table. Raj, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was truly my pleasure. It was great talking.